Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon,
Good
sir.
afternoon po, sir.
Yes po, I'm honored and privileged to be back again as your... Yes po. So I'm honored and privileged to be back again as your reviewer for the subject facilitating learner-centered teaching. Okay, so have you seen the results of the March 2022 licensure examinations? Nabasa niya, nakita niyo?
Yes po.
Yan.
Yes.
So dapat yun yung motivation natin. Yung top 2, top 4, and top 8 are from the pamantasan ng lungsod ng Valenzuela, our sister school. And also we have one, pamantasan ng lungsod ng Pasig, top 10. Okay. So sana makikita namin yung pangalan ninyo sa susunod na successful passers, especially top-notchers in the licensure examination for teachers. And again, of course, I would like to congratulate Dean Tongko for a high passing percentage for both the elementary and the secondary. Though mas mababa siya ng konti doon sa nakaraan, but still ang taas pa rin yan. Honestly, 65, 66, that is actually a feat to consider. Okay? Yan po. So for today, ang ating i-review ay ang facilitating learner-centered teaching. So before we proceed, just a gentle reminder for everyone. So please keep your mic on mute during lectures and presentations to avoid noise or distractions. During the open forum, please click the raise hand button and wait to be acknowledged if you have questions and clarifications. Please be respectful and be careful with humor and sarcasm, and embrace professional demeanor and communication, and avoid posting or sharing inappropriate comments on materials in the chat box. Okay, so again, this is facilitating learner-centered teaching. So for the course description, this course explores the fundamental principles, process, and practices anchored on learner-centeredness and other educational psychologies as these apply to facilitate teaching learning delivery modes to enhance learning. Okay, so before we proceed, meron po akong palaro. Of course, you're familiar with this, no? Ito yung tinatawag nating family feud. So please make use of the message button, o yung ano nyo dyan, yung chat button ninyo. We surveyed 100 students to determine the most popular instructional approaches. The top 4 answers are on the board. So please write your answers if you are familiar with the most popular instructional approaches. So the top 4 answers will be discussed a little later. Huwag niyo po ako nagpakita. Yan. Okay. Let me see. So if you are familiar with the teaching approaches, let me see. What are these familiar teaching approaches? So we have traditional approach. What else? What are other instructional approaches that you're familiar with? Chronological. Some more? Some other answers? Remember, there are many instructional approaches, but we are only looking for the 4 most popular instructional approaches. So we have learner-centered, traditional, casual approach, pen and paper approach. What else? Some more answers? Let me see. Ala. Okay, so let's start with pen and paper approach. Okay, let me see. Okay. So what are these top 4 answers. So let's reveal the top 4 answers. So if you are still familiar with the different approaches, of course, you are very familiar with the traditional learning approach. But of course, we have the cooperative learning approach, the differentiated instruction approach, and of course, we have the personalized learning approach. So these different approaches will be discussed a little later. Okay, so when we talk of traditional learning approach, so this is actually a structured education program that focuses on face-to-face teacher-centered instruction. So alam naman natin kung saan nanggagaling yung power, nanggagaling kay teacher. Okay, so parang rote learning itong traditional learning approach na to. So structured education program that focuses on face-to-face teacher-centered instruction, including teacher-led discussion and the teacher knowledge imparted to students. So lahat tayo very familiar with this instructional approach. I'm not pretty sure if you were exposed to cooperative learning approach. So this is actually an instructional strategy in which small groups of students work together on a common task. So if you are undergoing your practice teaching, you can actually make use of the cooperative learning approach, wherein you're going to group students into small groups, and then you're going to give them activities or task performance. Then of course, we have differentiated instruction approach. So this is a wide variety of teaching techniques and lessons adaptations that teachers use to instruct a diverse group of students with diverse learning needs in the same course, classroom, or learning environment. So of course, this is in consideration of what we call individual differences, that no two individuals are exactly the same or alike. Okay. So since diverse yung ating mga students ngayon, so you as a teacher, you can actually capitalize on these diversities of the students to make learning very interesting to your students. Of course, we have personalized. So this is actually an educational approach that aims to customize learning for its students' strengths, needs, skills, and interests. Okay. So before proceeding, let's try to define some important terms that we are going to meet in our discussion. Okay. So first, next slide, please. Let's have learning. So when we say learning, so you are actually familiar with this. Learning is a process by which behavior is either modified or wholly changed through experience or training. It is an ongoing process of continuous adaptation to our environment, assimilation of new information, and accommodation of new input to fit prior learning. Then we also have what we call learner-centered teaching, which will be discussed in a while. So kapag sinabi nating learner-centered teaching, ito yung tinatawag nating teaching that motivates and empowers students by giving them some control over learning processes. So kapag sinabi nating learner-centered teaching, encourages students to reflect on what they are learning and how they are learning it. So yun yung tinatawag nating learner-centered, which is very different from yung teacher-centered na we are used to. Okay? Or yung tinatawag nating traditional. So we are very familiar with this. But the focus or the emphasis now is what we call the learner-centered teaching approaches. Okay, in Weimer's book titled Learner-Centered Teaching, there are actually 5 key changes to practice. These are changes, or these 5 key changes were significantly taking place in schools. So papakita natin yan. So these are the 5 key changes in learner-centered teaching approaches. So we have in the framework na nandun sa gitna yung learner-centered approach, and then nandiyan yung role of the teacher, the function of content, the responsibility for learning, the balance of power, and evaluation. Okay, so let's talk first about balance of power. So kanino nanggagaling yung balance of power kapag ito ay tinatawag nating learner-centered na teaching approach. Okay, so alam natin in a traditional classroom, the power to decide what lessons to discuss, what learning activities students must engage in, and what is assessment task to give mainly belongs to the teacher with little input from students. Ang pagkakaiba niya sa learner-centered teaching, dito in a student-centered learning classroom, a teacher shares that power by consulting learners prior to making final decisions. Okay, so that's for the balance of power. How about for the function of content? Okay, in the function of content, current research evidence from educational psychology calls for a change in the function of curriculum content, which should be less on covering it and more on using content to develop a learner's individual way of understanding or sense making. Si teachers need to allow learners to raise their own questions, generate their own answers or solutions. Yan yung sa tinatawag nating teacher learner-centered. Not just like in a traditional approach kasi 'di ba lahat ng lessons, lahat ng discussions nanggagaling kay teacher. Okay, sunod-sunuran lang tayong mga estudyante. Okay. Okay, in a constructivist perspective, knowledge cannot simply be given to students. Meaning to say that students must construct their own meanings. So in other words, learners are capable of constructing and reconstructing their knowledge through active personal effort. So this view debunks the current belief about students learning from passively receiving information transmitted from teachers via lectures. So gone were the days nagiging passive learner tayo. Ngayon nagiging active recipient na tayo ng teaching and learning process. Okay? Next is the role of the teacher. Ano ngayon yung role of the teacher in a learner-centered instruction? Sa learner-centered instruction, ang role ni teacher is nagiging facilitator na lang ng learning. Hindi kagaya nung traditional na si teacher, siya yung source natin of information. Siya yung fountain of learning na tinatawag natin. So dito, si teacher encourages students to explore multiple knowledge sources, make sense of it, and personally organize the information taken from different sources. So yan yung pagkakaiba ng role ng teacher sa isang traditional at saka sa isang centered learner teaching approach. How about responsibility for learning? Siyempre kapag sinasabi nating learner-centered curriculum, learner-centered teaching methodology, siyempre ang mga estudyante are responsible for their own learnings. Okay, so each student may require different ways of learning, researching and analyzing the information available. So diyan sa learner-centered approach, tayo ay mga estudyante natin ang responsible for their own learning. So nakikita niyo siguro usually our role, di ba sabi natin kanina, our role are facilitators of learners kasi ang mga estudyante discover ways on how they learn and how they do things. Okay, how about the evaluation purpose and process? Kung anong ginagawa natin, ano yung mga assessment strategies na ginagawa natin ngayon sa isang learner-centered na approach. Before kasi, di ba, ang basis lang ni teacher in giving us grades would be the results of the quizzes, the results of the final examinations. So doon lang nagbabase. No, yung si teacher, sometimes ang basis niya is recitation, but now there are many things to consider in the assessment in the assessment process na tinatawag natin. So nagbibigay tayo ng portfolio assessment. So if you are familiar with portfolio assessment, usually yan yung common ngayon. Meron tayong tinatawag na what else, yung modular instruction. So these are actually some of the assessment techniques na ginagamit sa isang student-centered or learner-centered approach na tinatawag natin. Okay? So ano yung mga principles? So what are the principles of student-centered approaches or approach? Una, learning is personalized. So students are engaged in different ways and in different places. So again, sabi nga natin kanina, they are responsible for their own learning and how they do it. Learning is competency-based. So dito, students move ahead when they have demonstrated mastery of content. So kapag na-master nila yung content, they can actually move on to the next stage or ladder. Hindi kagaya before na mayroong prerequisites si teacher. O kailangan within 1 hour, natapos mo yan, or matatapos mo yung activity niyan, saka ka palang mag-move sa next activity. So iba na ngayon. Today, sa isang learner-centered approach na tinatawag natin, nagiging competency-based na yung learning na tinatawag natin. The third one, learning happens anytime, anywhere. O kagaya nga nito, di ba? Hindi na yung traditional na face-to-face. So meron na tayong tinatawag na synchronous, meron na tayong tinatawag na asynchronous, meron na tayong tinatawag na hybrid. Okay? So learning takes place beyond the traditional school day and even the school year. So learning is also not restricted to the classroom. So meron na tayo nitong virtual classroom na tinatawag natin. Virtual classroom definitely is going to stay. So that will be a strategy that is to be considered by some schools. No? So the last one is students take ownership of their learning. So students are engaged in their own success as well as incorporate their interests and skills into the learning process. So again, as mentioned a while ago, so there are actually 3 popular approaches, no, in a learner-centered approach. Ito yung tinatawag natin cooperative learning approach, differentiated approach, and the personalized approach. Okay. So what we are going to do, we're going to discuss based on Weimer's theory, we are going to discuss etong approaches na to along with the traditional approach. Okay, so let's see. So this is actually a comparison of teaching approaches. So the elements were actually discussed to you a while ago, yung 5 kanina, yung balance of power, function of content, role of teacher, responsibility for learning, and the assessment. Okay. Wala yung assessment. Ma'am, next slide, please. Doon po sa table, ma'am. Next 2 slides po.
Okay, sir. Wait lang po.
Ayan. Yan po, ma'am. Okay. Hindi po, ma'am. Yung a comparison of teaching approaches, yung table po. Prior slide po. Ayan. Okay. So, ito yung a comparison of teaching approaches. So, 4 na teaching approaches ang nandyan. The 3 are actually learner-centered approaches, while, of course, you know, the first one is the traditional approach. So we'll just have to compare yung traditional instructional approach doon sa 3 learner-centered approaches na to. Okay. So we begin with the elements as postulated by Weimer. So una, yung balance of power. So sino rito? Sino ang sa traditional approach, of course, si teacher, no? Minor role lang yung mga estudyante natin. In the cooperative learning approach, ang balance of power lies on the teacher. However, dito ini-empower na niya si estudyante for student teams for learning. Sa differentiated instructional approach, more choices are given to students based on their ability levels and interests. Sana lang kapag si teacher, problem here is dapat si teacher marunong siya dito sa mga approaches na to. So what if limited lang yung kakayahan ni teacher? So as much as possible, if you are the teacher, if you are the 21st century teacher, kailangan nyo na talaga magbasa. And you should be cognizant of the different approaches and how you will be able to teach these approaches to your students. In personalized learning approach, mostly reliant on student motivation and engagement. So sabi ko nga, importante yung idea ninyo of individual differences. Kapag kayo ay nagtuturo, kailangan aware kayo sa inyong mga estudyante, aware kayo sa kanilang mga skills, aware kayo sa kanilang abilities, no? Aware kayo sa kanilang intelligence or yung knowledge na tinatawag natin. So importante yon. Importante yung intindi natin ng tinatawag nating individual differences. So parati kong sinasabi, ini-emphasize ko to kasi lumalabas usually to. Though usually kapag lumalabas ito sa licensure examination, para siyang situational, no? But the answer to that is actually individual differences. So no, the idea of that not two individuals are exactly the same or alike. Sa function of content, dito sa traditional instructional approach na tinatawag natin, ito yung tinatawag nating imposed curriculum. Let's say for example, ito yung kagaya ng curriculum na kinukuha natin dito. So these are actually based from the Commission on Higher Education. 'Di ba? Ini-impose sa atin ng sa curriculum development niyo, makikita ninyo or mapapag-aaralan ninyo yung iba't ibang uri ng curriculum na tinatawag natin. Okay. Dito sa traditional approach, imposed a highly structured curriculum content in a fixed pace and timeline of learning. So, 'di ba, nakikita ninyo siguro sa curriculum ninyo, may first sem, second sem, first year, second year, first sem, second sem, hanggang matapos kayo ng fourth year. Asa inyo pala, since trimester siya, meron kayo first term, second term, and third term. Ayan. So, structured yung curriculum sa tinatawag nating traditional instructional approach. Sa isang cooperative learning approach, same content processed by students in groups or a fixed timeline of learning. Sa differentiated instructional approach, differentiated content in terms of difficulty levels, more flexible pace of learning. And personalized learning, so these are actually flexible curriculum content accordingly personalized learning paths or highly flexible pace of learning. So ang example nito yung mga nag-home study. Yung mga nag-home study actually, 'di ba, iba yung curriculum na kanilang sinusundan. Hindi kagaya nung regular student na kung ano yung nandoon sa curriculum, kailangan yun yung susundin mo. So this is different kapag you are engaged in a home study program. Okay? Okay. Ang role ng teacher, sa role of teacher in the traditional, si teacher, di ba sabi natin kanina, fountain of learning or fountain of knowledge na tinatawag natin. Si teacher, siya yung knowledge expert, siya yung authoritarian, siya yung classroom manager. In the cooperative learning approach, si teacher, siya yung facilitator of learning tasks done in collaborative peer group settings. Doon sa differentiated instructional approach, si teacher ay designer of differentiated learning tasks to accommodate the readiness, profile, and interest of students. So if you will be making use of a differentiated instructional approach, so kailangan talaga aware kayo doon sa iba't ibang level of readiness, profiling, or interest ng inyong students. And kapag siya ay sa personalized learning approach naman, ang role ng teacher ay collaborator or co-creator of knowledge. And sa responsibility of teaching, of course, aware tayo na sa isang traditional, the students are expected to fully understand knowledge passed on by their teachers. So dito kailangan mong mag-memorize. Yun yung sinasabi ko sa inyong rote learning. Kung ano sinasabi ni teacher, sinusundan natin. Sa isang cooperative learning approach naman, learning is co-created by students in group settings. So same true with differentiated instructional approach. So responsibility for learning is also co-created with students in group settings, while in a personalized learning approach, students design individualized learning plans to achieve mastery of targeted learning outcomes. Okay. An example of which is yung modular instruction na tinatawag natin. Okay? Yan. So those are the different learner-centered approaches na tinatawag natin. Now we proceed to the different learning theories. So kapag sinabi nating learning theories, they are actually a set of conjectures and hypotheses that explain the process of learning or how learning takes place. So makikita ninyo sa aking PPT, merong 5 main theories of learning. Ito yung tinatawag nating behaviorism. So if you are familiar with behaviorism, connectivism, constructivism, experientialism, and of course the social and contextual theories. Okay. So kapag sinabi nating behaviorism, learning and behavior changes are acquired by linking stimuli and response. And then kapag sinabi nating cognitivism, learning is internal and is a result of a student processing and organizing new information. And kapag sinabi nating constructivism, knowledge is constructed by adapting new information based on previous experience. So we are going to categorize the different theories. So simulan natin sa tinatawag nating behavioral learning theories or associative learning theories. Next slide po. Okay, so simulan natin. Next slide po. Simulan natin sa classical conditioning theory. So sino ang hindi nakakaalala kay Ivan Pavlov? Yung kanyang classical conditioning theory na tinatawag natin. Ma'am, next slide please. So can you still recall yung experiment ni Pavlov sa dog? So if you are familiar with that experiment, so ito yung tinatawag nating Pavlovian classical conditioning, or also known as Pavlovian or respondent and learning through association, which was actually discovered by Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist. So in simple terms, two stimuli are linked to produce a new learned response in a person or animal. Okay, so kapag sinabi natin classical, next slide po din. So kapag sinabi natin classical, it means unestablished manner. So this is actually a type of learning that involves forming associations between two stimuli. So si Pavlov believes that individual learns when a previously, next slide po din, when a previously neutral stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus until the neutral stimulus evolves into a conditioned response. Okay, so remember yung bell, that is actually the bell and the dog and the salivation. Okay. So yung meron tinatawag nating unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned stimulus in the form of the bell. And then meron yung tinatawag in conditioned stimulus, which is salivation. Okay. So kung maalala niyo yung experiment ni Pavlov, di ba? Kapag nagre-ring yung bell, no? Ano yung magiging response niya? Yung ni dog, wala siyang magiging response. Pero kapag sinundan ng presentation ng pagkain, yung ringing of the bell, ang response ng dog is salivation. Okay. So for example, when you smell one of your favorite foods, ano ang mararamdaman mo? Diba? So kapag nakaka-smell ka, halimbawa lechon, halimbawa ice cream, halimbawa mangga, ano yung pakiramdam mo? Ano yung nararamdaman mo? So you may immediately feel very hungry. The next slide po, please. So in this example, the smell of the food is the unconditioned stimulus. The feeling of hunger in response to the smell of food is what we call the unconditioned response. Okay. So I remember when I was actually in college, meron akong teacher. The next slide po, please.
Sir, ito po yung slide nyo. Next is
Next na po.
theory.
Next na po, yung kay ano na po tayo, classical conditioning na po. Okay. So when I was actually in college, hindi ako mahihiyang i-share sa inyo yung buhay ko, no. I actually made my way to college as a scholar, no. Kasi mahirap lang kami, so I applied for scholarship, and then I passed the scholarship, and to maintain that scholarship, kailangan you have to maintain a very good grade. The next slide na po. After that slide na po, yung ano na po tayo, yung what do they call this? Behavioral learning theories or associative learning theories. Una dyan is the classical conditioning theory. Okay. So again, so when I was in college, I have this professor. Yung professor ko, sabi niya, if you are going to maintain your scholarship, I will be giving you 500 pesos for the next semester. So yung 500 pesos is actually the stimulus. The conditioned response there is for you to be maintaining your grade. Okay? Ayan, yan yung example. Yan yung example ng experiment ni Pavlov na tinatawag natin. Ay. Kay Pavlov po din. So si Pavlov, meron siyang tinatawag na stimulus generalization. So ang stimulus generalization is a process by which the conditioned response transfer to other stimuli that are similar to the original conditioned stimulus. So halimbawa nga yung presentation of the food. So kapag nakakarinig ng sound ng bell ang dog, ang natural reaction niya is salivation. Okay. So sa discrimination naman, so this is actually a process by which one learns not to respond to similar stimuli in an identical manner because of previous experiences. So hindi lahat ng sound na naririnig ng isang aso will elicit the same response. So yung tunog lang ng bell, that is the only sound na alam niyang i-discriminate. Na kapag nagtumunog yung bell, automatically may kasunod na pagkain. Okay? So that is how discrimination works in the experiment of Pavlov. And the third one is yung tinatawag nating extinction. So the process by which a conditioned response is lost. So let's say for example, ako for example, kahit wala na yung 500 pesos na reward coming from the teacher, still magpe-perform pa rin ako magpe-perform well pa rin ako sa aking klase. Okay. So the second under the behavioral learning theories or associative learning theories is yung kay Edward Thorndike's connectionism theory. So I hope marirecall nyo pa yung tatlong yung laws of learning postulated by Edward Thorndike. So he states that learning is the result of associations forming between stimuli and responses. Puts more emphasis on the response of the organism, not limiting himself to the association between the stimulus and the response. So can you still recall, class, yung inyong laws of learning? Ito yung tinatawag nating law of readiness, law of exercise, and law of effect. Okay, I think I have mentioned some in my previous discussion. So ito yung mga ito yung tatlong laws of learning that was postulated by Edward Lee Thorndike. So una dyan is yung law of readiness. The readiness is an important condition of learning. A learner may be satisfied or frustrated depending on his or her states of readiness. So the learner should be biologically prepared. So remember nung sabi ko sa inyo the last time na hindi niyo pa pwedeng turuan ng isang kindergarten ng isang complex na equation, for example, o gusto niyo na kaagad siyang turuan ng statistics, hindi pa siya biologically ready or prepared sa pag-aaral ng mga complicated na lessons. So ang mangyayari sa kanya, magkakaroon siya ng frustration kasi binigyan mo na siya kaagad ng mahihirap na lessons. Well, in fact, kapag grasp niya or ready siya to understand the concept or the lesson you're going to introduce, magiging satisfying sa kanya yon. So please take note of the readiness of your students. So kung yung estudyante mo hindi pa marunong tumambling, hindi pa ready para tumambling, huwag mo siyang patamblingin. Baka mamaya magiging traumatic para sa kanya yon sa pag-aaral niya ng mga mas complex na movement na tinatawag natin. Okay. So the second one is what we call law of exercise. The law of exercise explains that any connection is strengthened in proportion to the number of times it occurs and in proportion to the average vigor and duration of the connection. Remember yung sabi ko sa inyo, drill is an important component of what we call the law of exercise. Diba? Para mas lalo nating maintindihan yung let's say for example lesson, kailangan bugbugin natin ng drills yung mga bata, especially in mathematics. Sabi nga nila, practice makes it perfect. Okay? And then the last one is what we call law of effects. So law of effect, when an organism's response is accompanied or followed by a satisfactory state, the strength of the connection is increased. So if an annoying state accompanies or follows the response, the strength of the connection is decreased. Kahit na anong gagawin mo kapag frustrated yung bata, no? Hindi mo na siya mako-compel na mag-aral. So dito, reward successes or positive reinforcement further learning, while punishment, failure, or negative experiences hinder it. So makikita ninyo makikita nyo actually rito yung role ng rewards at saka punishment sa pag-aaral ng isang bata. So maalala ko yung mga before, yung mga tinuturuan kong mga kindergarten, nag-tutor kasi ako before eh. So right after class, kapag may dala akong chocolate for example or candies, mas gustong-gusto nilang mag-participate sa aking klase or sa aking discussion. Okay? So please avoid yung punishment. If you are teaching elementary or even in secondary, please avoid using punishment, no, in dealing with your students. So there are many ways. Sabi nga, there are many ways of dressing a chicken, but punishment should not be used to coerce students to learn or your learners to learn. Okay. So we have the third theory under what we call the behavioral learning theories or associative learning theories, yung kay Burroughs Skinner. So maalala nyo si Burroughs Skinner, yung kanyang experiment? Yung experiment ni Burroughs Skinner, ni B.F. Skinner sa rat, meron siyang tinatawag na Skinner's box. So if you are familiar or if you can recall, kung itinuro ito sa inyo ng teacher ninyo in your foundation of education or in any of your foundation of education subjects, so siguro makaka-relate kayo rito. Okay, so let's try to digest yung may nag-ano po. Palalagpasin lang po natin yung Yan, marami po kasi ang ano rito nangangampanya. So let's have the operant conditioning theory of Bruce Skinner. So again, sabi ko nga sa inyo, I know you are very familiar with the operant conditioning. So kapag sinabi natin operant conditioning, sometimes referred to as instrumental conditioning. So this is actually a method of learning that employs rewards and punishments for behavior. Si Skinner, ginamit niya yung term na operant to refer to any active behavior that operates upon the environment to generate consequences. So it stresses the consequences, the consequence of behavior in order to learn. And dito sa kanyang experiment, he proved that reinforcement is a powerful tool in shaping and controlling behavior in and out of the classroom. So again, try to imagine yourself yung yung experiment. Meron tayong tinatawag ni Skinner's box. Doon sa Skinner's box, nakalagay doon yung merong lever, merong rat doon sa loob ng Skinner's box. So if you are familiar with this, no? So when lab rats, yung mga laboratory rats na tinatawag natin, or yung mga experiment na ginagamit sa laboratory, mga rats experiments na ginagamit sa laboratory. So when lab rats press a lever, when a green light is on, they receive a food pellet as a reward. So nung una kasi, ang behavior ng rat is accidental. So umikot siya ng umikot doon sa doon sa Skinner's box and accidentally presses the lever. And then when he presses the lever, no, at nag-umilaw ng green light, naglalabas ito ng tinatawag nating food pellet as a reward. But when they press the lever, when a red light is on, they receive a mild electric shock. So nakikita ninyo? So meaning to say, si rat, hindi niya ipipress yung lever kapag ito ay naka-red light. So ang ipipress lang niya yung lever kapag ito ay naka-green light. So as a result, they learn to press the lever when the green light is on and avoid the red light. So every time na nagre-red light, ina-avoid nila yon. Kasi alam nila na that is a punishment. Alam nila na they will be receiving alam ng rat na magre-receive siya ng tinatawag nating electric shock. So he will only respond kapag green light yung naka-on. Kasi alam niya na maglalabas ito ng pagkain as a reward. Okay. So si Skinner classifies reinforcement into verbal. Ito yung tinatawag nating praise and encouragement. So ginagawa natin yan. Halimbawa, yung estudyante natin, nakakapagbigay siya ng magandang idea, nakakapag-recite siya, so we praise. We praise the students, we encourage the students. So that is actually a reinforcement, a verbal reinforcement na tinatawag natin. Physical reinforcement, ito yung touches, pats, hugs, pats on the shoulder, di ba? And then accompanied with very good. Okay. So the more na yung mga estudyante natin, if given this reinforcement, the more na nagpa-participate sila sa ating klase. Meron din tayong tinatawag nating non-verbal. Minsan ang tawag natin dito is non-discursive communication. So take note of this, baka lalabas lang, no? Non-verbal or non-discursive communication, ito yung smiles, yung winks, yung warm looks, or yung mga bodily gestures ng isang teacher na nagpapakita na contented siya sa ginawang performance ng isang bata, or yung kanyang pagpa-participate sa klase. Or it can also be an activity, being allowed to play games, listen to music, especially kapag nasa bahay ka, alam ni tatay o sa kanina nanay, especially nagiging teacher ng mga bata natin, yung ating mga nanay, yung kanilang mga nanay at saka tatay. So kapag nagawa ni teacher, ni learner or ni estudyante yung kanyang mga modules, sige, pinagpapahinga muna siya ni tatay, sige, mag-ML ka muna diyan, sige, manood ka ng makinig ka ng music or manood ka ng TV. So these are actually reinforcement of this type, yung tinatawag natin. Meron din tayong tinatawag na token, no? Points, chips, stars, no? Maalala niyo yung bata, I think yung viral na bata na dinocument ng kanyang nanay, parang binilhan siya yata ng toy ng kanyang tatay. Pumunta yata sila sa isang mall, or for example sa mall, tapos binilhan siya, and then when the mother asked kung okay na yung yung module niya, tapos biglang hindi kita naiintindihan na, parang ganun. Pero those are actually tokens na pwede nating ibigay sa mga estudyante natin or sa mga mag-aaral natin when performing a very good task, or kaya consumable. Ito talaga mahilig ako, even when I was still teaching yung professional education subjects, kasi gusto kong i-emphasize because they are would-be teachers. So gusto kong i-emphasize sa kanila kung ano yung role, kung ano yung magiging reaction ng isang estudyante kapag nag-participate siya ng klase at binigyan ko siya ng chocolate, binigyan ko siya ng cookies, no? Or binigyan ko siya ng pera. So ginagawa ko yan even among my education students, just to emphasize yung idea ng tinatawag nating reinforcement. So these are actually very important in the learning of our students. Okay. Now we proceed to yung tinatawag nating social learning theory. Yan. So social learning theory or modeling ni Albert Bandura. So of course, si Albert Bandura is actually very famous for his social learning theory, or what we call observational learning theory. The social learning theory or the observational learning theory states that learning takes place when one observes and then imitates the behavior of others. It stresses the importance of models because the observer or the learner may acquire new responses, strengthen or weaken every existing response, and cause the reappearance of responses that have been apparently forgotten. So nakikita ninyo, yung mga estudyante nyo, ina-idolize kayo. I always ask my students who among your teachers have a direct impact on your achievement. So sinasabi talaga nila yung kanilang mga teachers as one of their influencers, or as one of their models. So of course you are familiar with the Bobodal experiment ni Albert Bandura. So if you are familiar with the Bobodal experiment, doon sa Bobodal experiment, it demonstrated that children are able to learn social behavior such as aggression through the process of observation learning, through watching the behavior of another person. Actually, ito yung experiment nila among kindergarten pupils yata. So dinivide nila yung dito sa experiment nito, dinivide nila yung grupo or yung class into 3, and then yung isa pinanood nila ng movie na may aggression, na may team na aggression. Okay? So yun napatunayan nila dito sa kanilang Bobodal experiment na tinatawag natin. So demonstrated that children are able to learn social behaviors such as aggression through the process of observation learning, through watching the behavior of another person. So nakikita niyo siguro yung mga estudyante ninyo na hindi natin nilalahat, pero let's say for example, yung estudyante ninyo nakatira siya sa isang Islam or sa isang community na ang nakikita niya parati is away or sigawan. So usually na-absorb niya yung kung ano yung nakikita niya. No, so yan yung pinatunayan ni Albert Bandura sa kanyang social learning theory or observational learning theory. So ang implication nito, so bilang isang teacher, kailangan mong magpakita ng magandang values, behavior sa mga estudyante mo. 'Di ba? Sabi nga nila, train a child to where he should go so that when he grows old, he is not going to depart from it. So words to that extent. So mayroong mga ganun na ano. So kailangan talaga importante yung role modeling na tinatawag natin dito. Bilang isang teacher, kailangan mag-impart tayo ng magandang values sa ating mga estudyante. Okay, dito mayroong 4 phases. May 4 phases si Bandura. Ito yung tinatawag nating attention, retention, motor reproduction process, and motivational process. Sa attention, so more exposure does not ensure the acquisition of behavior. An observer must attend to and recognize the distinctive features of the model's response. Mamaya papaliwanag ko sa inyo to sa pamamagitan ng isang example. Retention. Reproduction of the desired behavior implies that the student symbolically retains that observed behavior. Motor reproduction process after observation, how students demonstrate as soon as possible. Correct behavior can be reinforced while incorrect ones are altered. And then the last is motivational process. Although the observer acquires and retains the ability to perform the model behavior, there will be no overt performance unless conditions are favorable. Okay, so let's try to see an example of learning through observation or process of observational learning na tinatawag natin. For example, driving a car. Okay. So yung attentional process in driving a car, you have to pay attention. So you really have to pay attention while driving a car. Otherwise, you will get involved in an accident if you are not going to pay attention. Diba? Okay. And then, in the retention process, you have to remember the right buttons or pedals. Baka mamaya iba pa na pala yung nahawakan ng buttons or yung pedals na nahawakan mo. So baka mamaya magkaroon ka ng tinatawag na aksidente or it may cause you an accident. So you have to remember the right buttons or pedals. Ito yung tinatawag nating retention process. Okay. And then you will have to practice driving on your own. Ito yung motor production process na tinatawag natin. So if you want to learn to drive on your own, you have to practice driving on your own. Okay? And then ang motivational process, if you know now how to drive on your own, you will be able to arrive sa eskwelahan in time. So that's the motivational process. So those are the 4 processes that are involved in learning through observation na tinatawag natin. Okay, so attention process, retention process, motor production process, and the motivational process. Okay. Now we proceed to the cognitive learning theories na tinatawag natin. So ano yung mga cognitive learning theories na tinatawag natin? So when we say cognitive learning theories, refer to concrete on analyzing cognitive processes or they believe in the non-observable behavior. Okay. So ang una dyan is yung kay David Ausubel's meaning reception learning theory. Okay. Dito sa theory na to, this is actually concerned with how students learn large amounts of meaningful material from verbal to textual presentations in a school setting. So meaningful learning results when information is acquired by linking the new information to the learner's own cognitive structure. Meaningful learning occurs when new experiences are related to what the learner already knows. So kapag hindi ito related sa kanyang existing knowledge, hindi magiging meaningful yung kanyang learning. So a major instructional mechanism proposed by Ausubel is the use of advanced organizers. So meaning to say, these are actually different from overviews and summaries, which simply emphasize key is different from discovery learning. So when we say reception learning and discovery learning, there are differences. There are differences between the two. So when we say reception learning, this is actually concerned with presenting the ideas to be learned to the learner in a well-organized fashion. So kapag topsy-turvy, definitely distracted yung learning ng bata. No, if the ideas are presented to the learner in a well-organized fashion, magiging meaningful yung learning para sa bata. Ito yung tinatawag nating reception learning. Discovery learning, on the other hand, focuses on having identified the key ideas to be learned by themselves and working out to store this information on their own. Kaya nga tinatawag nating discovery learning. Okay, let's also have yung kay Bruner's discovery learning theory or inquiry method. Ano naman yung kay Jerome Bruner's discovery learning theory or inquiry method? Ito implies learning by discovering the solution, especially in the subject mathematics. So if you're a major of mathematics, alam niyo ang sinasabi ko. Contends that students should be given a wide variety of examples of certain facts and information and encourage them to discover that answer or that underlying rules or principles. So minsan kahit itinuro ng teacher sa mathematics, because I was also a mathematics major, kahit itinuro methodically ng aking teacher yung solution, for example, sa given problem, meron kaming shortcut way to arrive at a correct answer. No, so dinidiscover namin even not going through the process of solving the equation. For example, there is a shortcut version in solving the equation. So because we are discovering it for ourselves. So sabi nga ni Seymour Papert, you can't teach people everything they need to know. The best you can do is to position them where they can find what they need to know when they need to know it. Okay, so yan yung tinatawag nating discovery learning by Jerome Bruner's. Okay. Now, let's have other significant learning concepts. So we begin with kay Howard Gardner, multiple of intelligences. So ano yung theory ng tinatawag nating multiple intelligences? So alam niyo naman siguro dito. So hindi lang siya nagbe-base sa tinatawag nating tawag natin yung old knowledge. No, yung kino-compute natin yung intelligence, diba kino-compute natin yung intelligence natin para malaman natin kung ano yung category natin doon sa intelligence range na yon. Si Gardner, meron siyang ibang idea. So ito nga yung kanyang tinatawag na multiple intelligences. So this theory suggests that traditional psychometric views of intelligence are too limited. Gardner proposed that there are 8 intelligences. In fact, sabi nga niya meron pang pang-siyam. Ito yung tinatawag nating existentialist intelligence. So ito yung 8 or siyam na type of intelligences postulated by Gardner. So meron siyang tinatawag na visual spatial. So kapag sinabi nating visual spatial, think in images, space and dimensions. So sino-sino ang mga to? No? Meron din siyang tinatawag na linguistic verbal. Ito yung ating mga politiko. So kapag sinabi nating linguistic verbal, use words and language. No? So kapag sinabi nating interpersonal, perceive other people's feelings. Yan. And then kapag sinabi nating intrapersonal, ito yung tinatawag nating understand oneself. Okay? So kapag sinabi nating logical, mathematical, no? So use logic and numbers. So ito yung mga engineers, yung mga major in mathematics, yan. They have this kind of what we call intelligence. And then may also yung musical. Si Morissette. So familiar with si Regine Velasquez. Ayan. So sila yung they create music, sound, and rhythm. Ayan. Meron silang intelligence na ito. Then, of course, we have the bodily kinesthetic, yung mga physical education measures dyan. Control body movement, yung mga athletes natin dyan. So they have this kind of intelligence. And meron din yung tinatawag nating naturalistic intelligence. So if you love nature, so you belong to this. So understand the natural world. No? So mahilig kang mag-hiking, if you love nature, so you belong to this. And yung kanyang existentialist nga, existentialist yung kanyang pangsyam, sa intelligence type ni Gardner, think deep about life. Ayan. And then another is yung Montessori method. So alam ko familiar din kayo sa kay Maria Montessori. Yung iba siguro sa inyo would have the chance to teach in a Montessori type of school. Maganda yung idea ng Montessori class, no? So kung ma-absorb ninyo kung paano sila nagtuturo ng kanilang mga estudyante, you can actually make use of this idea when you are already in the public school, no? Si Montessori or Montessori type of education is based on self-directed activity, hands-on learning, and collaborative play. In Montessori classrooms, children make creative choices in their learning, while the classroom and the highly trained teacher offer age-appropriate activities to guide the process. So sabi ko sa inyo, ako si Marisol. So I was actually still studying in college when nagkaroon ako ng chance na maging tutor. And then usually kasi yung mga tinuturuan ko, I have to fetch them sa kanilang classroom. And then one time I out of the blue, kasi pinag-aralan namin yung Montessori type of method of education. And then out of the blue, nabanggit ko doon sa teacher who is actually very new in the teaching profession. So sabi ko, teacher, bakit hindi natin pwedeng i-introduce yung Montessori method of education sa ating mga estudyante? Baka sa ating mga pupils, baka magugustuhan nila, mag-e-enjoy sila sa paglalaro while they are actually learning. So that's the beauty of the Montessori method na tinatawag natin. Okay? Now let's have yung idea ni Confucius na education to all na tinatawag natin. Doon sa idea ni Confucius, he revolutionized actually education by providing education to all. According to him, education has no class distinction. So all human beings are teachable and improvable. A person desiring an education should be educated. Okay. So ito yung naging basehan ng education system ng China for 2,000 years. Yung tinatawag natin Confucian education system. Okay? For Confucius, education is essential because excellence comes from the cultivation of individuals' virtues and intellect. Now we have Froebel. So kung maalala niyo, si Froebel is the father of kindergarten. Okay, so he's best known as the originator of kindergarten. So sa kanya, play is the highest expression of human development in childhood. For it alone is the free expression of what is in a child's soul. So that is according to Froebel, who is the father of kindergarten. And then we have Brunner's three modes of representation. Ito, meron tinatawag tayong enactive representation. So, information is represented through action. So, I can't tell you, but I can show you. Meron yung mga ganung teachers mahirap nilang i-express yung kanilang sarili, but they can actually show it to their students. Or, it can be iconically represented. Yung tinatawag nating iconic representation wherein information is represented through images and perceptions. So pwedeng maps, flowcharts, diagrams, TV, yan. And then symbolic representation, information is represented in more abstract forms such as language, mathematics, or symbols. So yan yung kay Brunner's instrumental conceptualism. And then, of course, you are familiar with John Dewey. Sabi ni John Dewey, learning by doing. So according to him, give the pupil something to do, not something to learn. And the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking. Learning naturally results. And then, of course, familiar din kayo kay John Locke, yung idea niya ng tabula rasa. Sabi niya ni John Locke, ang bata daw, yung kanyang utak is a blank slate. But this was already disputed by some philosophers. Pero still, yan yung idea ni John Locke, yung tabula rasa na tinatawag natin or blank slate na tinatawag natin. Si Locke posited that people are born as blank slates or tabula rasas, and that the way they are treated and educated ultimately shapes who they will become. So that's the idea of John Locke. And then we also have here the idea of Wolfgang Kohler, yung kanyang insight learning na tinatawag. So sino ang hindi alala kay Sultan? So siya yung experiment naman ni Wolfgang Kohler kay Sultan sa isang monkey na tinatawag natin. So insight learning refers to the sudden realization of a solution of a problem. So after a period of mentally manipulation of aspects of a problem for a while. So ito nga yung kanyang ginawang experiment. No? Si Sultan, the chimp who was caged with food, strategically placed outside the cage. So some boxes and sticks were placed in the cage. So ngayon, iniisip ngayon nitong monkey kung ano ang gagawin niya with the sticks para makakuha siya ng pagkain. So in short a while, na-figure out niya na sa pamamagitan ng stick, makakakuha siya ng pagkain. So ito yung experiment ni Wolfgang Kohler, yung insight learning na tinatawag natin. Okay? And of course, meron tayong scaffolding. So alam niyo naman siguro ito kay Lev Vygotsky. So kung maalala ninyo yung kay Zone of Proximal Development or ZPD ni Lev Vygotsky. Okay. So when we say scaffolding or scaffolding instruction, this is actually defined as the role of teachers and others in supporting the learner's development and providing support structures to get to the next stage or level. So ito yung kanyang ZPD na tinatawag natin or Zone of Proximal Development natin, kung saan matututo yung isang bata with the help of an adult. Okay, so teachers provide scaffolds so that the learner can accomplish certain tasks they would otherwise not be able to accomplish on their own. So kapag hindi nagbigay ng support si teacher, usually nahihirapan yung mga estudyante in doing their activities. So importante yung scaffolding na tinatawag natin. Our role as teachers, no, sa pagbibigay ng tinatawag nating scaffolding sa ating mga estudyante. So the goal of educator is for the student to become an independent learner and problem solver. Okay, we proceed now to the spiral curriculum and discovery learning by Jerome Bruner. So actually dalawa itong konsepto na to, yung spiral curriculum and discovery learning na tinatawag natin. Bruner believes that when students discover it by themselves, it increases the responsibility to learn on their own and motivate to learn more. Kapag sinabi nating spiral curriculum, so this is actually a curriculum design in which key concepts are presented repeatedly throughout the curriculum, but with deepening layers of complexity or in different applications. For example, yung curriculum ng kindergarten, preparatory for the curriculum of grade 1. So with so nagkakaroon lang ng complexity doon sa activities o kaya mga methodologies or applications na ginagamit ng isang teacher. Okay? And then, of course, you're aware of discovery learning, which is a method of inquiry-based instruction. So this popular theory encourages learners to build on past experiences and knowledge, use their intuition, imagination, and creativity, and search for new information to discover facts or correlations and new truths. Okay. Din, water break lang ako, saglit lang.
Go po, Doc.
Kasi kung wala na.
Din, can I share my PPT? Magbibigay lang ako ng mga exercises before I proceed with the second part of my lecture.
Sure po.
Okay pa. Din, sorry, hindi yata nakaano yung aking PC. I-send ko ulit po yung yung PPT, and then paki-share screen po ulit yung
Okay
aking
po.
mga exercises.
We'll wait po sa PPT nyo.
Okay po. Last 2 slides po din. Wait lang po. Okay, so before we proceed with the second part of my lecture, magbibigay lang ako ng mga exercises. Some examples na lumalabas usually sa licensure. Mamaya may isang question na hindi yata kasama dito sa discussion ko, but I am going to explain it to you later. Dinopay na po. Yung last 2 slides po niyan, pa-share na lang po din. Okay, so I have 4 exercises dito.
Same lang
So
po
let's-
yung slides. Same lang po yung PPT.
Sa dulo po din, may bago po akong inclusion na 2
Ito po.
slides.
Wait lang po.
Apa. Sa pinakadulo po. Okay, so what we are going to do, we are going to dissect the 4 questions and then you are going to key in your answer. So sisimulan muna natin dun sa unang tanong, no, while waiting for the presentation of Dean. Okay.
This one po ba, Doc?
Ay, hindi po na, last 2 po. Last 2. Last 2 slides yata.
Wait po.
Let me see. Opo, na-send ko po din. Last 2 slides. So actually
Okay po,
meron
okay.
akong ano dyan. Nakita
Papalitan
niyo
na
po
po.
din? Okay po.
Opo, nakita ko po. Wait po.
Okay po. So I will be sending after the lecture yung Word file ng aking lecture kay Dean and then she will be sharing it with you. Okay, so while waiting, I am going to read to you the question and then you are going to answer it. And then please try to type your note or key in your answer making use of the icons. Okay, so Teacher Miguel believes that in order to effectively teach, thinking skills like reflective thinking, intuitive thinking, and discovery learning must emphasize on the students. So which particular school of thought or branch of psychology best represents his principles? Okay, so we have A, social psychology, B, humanistic psychology, C, cognitive psychology, or D, behaviorism. Titingnan natin para makita natin, para mabasa natin yung yung tanong. So let's just wait for the PPT to be shared.
Uwi na si Master. Wala na yan dyan. Magpano.
Okay, so let's have the first question. So Teacher Miguel believes that in order to effectively teach, thinking skills like reflective thinking, intuitive thinking, and discovery learning must emphasize on the students. So which particular school of thought or branch of psychology best represents his principles? A, social psychology, B, humanistic psychology, C, cognitive psychology, or D, behaviorism. Please key in your answer. Let me see. Ayan, ang daming sumagot ng letter C. So meaning to say, nakikinig kayo sa aking lecture. Ayan. Okay, next question. A type of lesson that requires revisiting old facts and concepts from a new perspective and setting is known as letter A, drill, letter B, review, letter C, development, or letter D, independent study. A type of lesson that requires revisiting old facts and concepts from a new perspective and setting is known as A, drill, B, review, C, development, or D, independent study. So let me see. So tama yung sagot nyo kanina dun sa una, cognitive psychology. So nasa number 2 question na po tayo. So I assume itong sumagot ng B ay referring to my question number 2. Yan. So ayan. So at least naiintindihan nyo yung tanong ha. So always remember that. You try to discern first the question and review the choices. So kung sa choices, alam nyo na kaagad kung alin doon yung mga yung kailangan ninyong tanggalin, and then zero in doon sa closest answers. Okay, so ang tamang sagot dyan ay review. Eto. I was not able to discuss this a while ago, pero I will be discussing it a little later to you. So among the following choices, which shows divergent question? So hindi ko alam kung sa inyong methods of teaching, if you have that subject, meron yung tinatawag nating the art of questioning. Part of it is yung art of questioning. So dito lumalabas yung ating yung type of questions na tinatawag nating divergent question at saka convergent question. Okay. Without me discussing the difference, so among the following choices, which shows divergent question? A is if a woman. B, when is Christmas Day? Letter C, how much did you spend on that bike? Or letter D, what are the ways of conserving water? So your answer would be, let me see. Okay. Yan. So maraming nakakuha ng sagot. Mayroong nag-A. But the answer is letter B. So yun yung pagkakaiba ng convergent question at saka divergent question. So kapag sinabi nating convergent, we discuss first what convergent question is. Kapag sinabi nating convergent question, it requires a definite answer. So halimbawa, who is the President of the Philippines? Yan. Ito yung sa multiple choice, sa matching types, sa true or false. So these are example of what we call convergent questions, which is different from what we call divergent questions. So ito yung mga why questions. No? So wherein, sa essay, for example, sa essay, wherein you are going to express your ideas about the topic that is given. Okay? Ang divergent question, ang sabi nila sa divergent questions, measure higher order thinking skills na tinatawag natin. Okay? So remember the difference between divergent and convergent questions. Convergent questions require a definite answer. So kapag divergent question, so these are actually questions that you are going to express your ideas about a given topic. Okay? Then the last one, as a special education teacher, Mr. Reyes has students of different skills and levels. He therefore prepares activities for each group like fast learners, average learners, and slow learners. What is the basis of Mr. Reyes for doing this? Letter A, law of readiness. Letter B, varied activities and multi-level activities. Letter C, interesting lessons. Or letter D, maximizing potentials. And your answer would be, again, yes. Galing. So at least alam nyo na kung paano pag-dissect ng mga questions. Unti-unti sa pamamagitan ng mga exercises na binibigay namin, I hope you'll be able to master, no? Dissecting questions and discerning the questions. So sa palagay ko, magtatap tayo ngayon sa licensure examination. So those are example of some examples of the questions that I constructed for this subject. So mamaya i-share din sa inyo yung ginawa kong G-form ng exam, 4P item exam for this subject. Okay, we proceed with the second part of my lecture. Okay, So, achieving cognitive, psychomotor, and affective learning outcomes. So naririnig niyo siguro to, no? Naririnig niyo siguro ito sa inyong mga professors before, no? Usually ito yung ginagamit sa lesson planning. So if you will recall, yung tinatawag nating CAP or minsan tinatawag nating CPA, no, cognitive, affective, psychomotor. So depending on the school, no? So kung ang ginagamit nila cognitive muna bago psychomotor, and then affective would be last, or cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. So it depends really on the school. Okay? So what are learning outcomes? So when we talk of learning outcomes, 'di ba? Ngayon sa ano natin sa ating mga modules, unang-unang nakalagay diyan, learning outcomes. So at the end of the lesson, the students are expected to. Yan. So these are actually what we call learning outcomes. So consists of the particular knowledge, skill, or behavior that a student is expected to exhibit after a period of study. So provides information on what particular knowledge, cognitive. So when we say knowledge, that is on the cognitive side, skill or behavior. So that is psychomotor and affective. So students gained after instruction is completed. So usually when we formulate our objectives in lesson planning, we always consider yung tinatawag nating cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Okay. So ano yung tinatawag nating cognitive? So kung makikita ninyo, yan yung Bloom's taxonomy. Yung nasa left side is the old version, yung new version ay nasa right. So when we talk of cognitive learning, it includes the learning of fact, the learning of concept, the learning of generalization, and the thinking. So kapag sinabi nating fact, something that is true, something that actually exists, or something having objective reality that can be identified according to an established standard or evaluation. So it's the lowest form of cognitive learning. And then concept, so basically the main idea, a general idea derived or interfered from specific instances or occurrences or related set of facts put together, a higher form of learning. And then we also have generalization, so act or process of perceiving similarity or relation between stimuli or different stimuli between words, colors, sounds, light, concepts, or feelings. The formation of general notion, putting together related concept. It also be familiar or similar to the formulation of principles and rules governing certain concepts previously learned. So this is actually the highest form of learning. And then we have thinking, rational reasoning, involve logic. So yan yung tinatawag nating cognitive learning. So it includes fact, concept, generalization, and thinking. So again, yung nakikita ninyo sa inyong screen, that's the old Bloom's taxonomy, yung nasa left, and then yung nasa right ay yung bagong Bloom's taxonomy. So kung makikita ninyo, the lowest is, of course, the knowledge. So expertise and skill acquired by a person through experience or education. And then meron siyang comprehension. I'm talking about the old Bloom's taxonomy. So meron siyang comprehension, which has also its equivalent dito sa bagong pyramid ni Bloom. So we have the comprehension, intellectual ability, the ability to grasp the meaning of something. We also have application, the act of putting something to a spatial use or purpose. And then we have analysis, resolution of anything complex into simple elements. Then we have synthetic, the result of combination or combining of various components, ideas, influences, or objects into a new whole. And then evaluation, assessment of value, the act of considering, examining something in order to judge its value, quality, importance, extent, or condition. Okay. Yeah. The next is we have affective learning. So when we say affective learning, it includes the learning of belief, attitude, and values. So when we talk of belief, an accepting of something or someone as true or reliable without asking for proof. Or attitude, a particular feeling or way of thinking about something. And we have the values, important and enduring beliefs or ideals shared by the members of a culture about what is good or desirable and what is not. This addresses interests, attitudes, options, appreciations, values, and emotional sets and values, the learning of which should lead to internalization. So nandiyan yung tinatawag nating levels of affective domain by Krathwohl's. Yan. Or yung Krathwohl's taxonomy na tinatawag natin. So ang una dyan is identification, clarification, exploration, So identification, clarification, exploration, modification, and characterization. So that is for Krathwohl's taxonomy. Iba-iba yung terms na ginagamit ni Krathwohl's sa kanyang taxonomy. Yung taxonomy niya, yung other taxonomies or kung makikita niyo siguro, meron siyang tinatawag nating receiving, meron siyang tinatawag nating responding, meron siyang tinatawag na valuing, meron siyang tinatawag na organization, and yung last nga niya yung characterization by a value complex. So please take note na kapag sinabi nating affective, it addresses interest, attitudes, options, appreciations, values, and emotional sets and values, the learning of which should lead to internalization. Okay? So ano yung mga principles involved in achieving the development of attitudes and values and their classroom implications? So every interaction with children provides an opportunity to teach values. Children learn about values through daily interaction with us. So children learn through our examples. So again, sabi ko nga sa inyo kanina, importante yung pagmamodel natin ng right values to our students. Okay, children learn values through the way we do things as a family. Children learn values and beliefs through their exposure to the larger world. And children learn values through our explanations of the world. And then, of course, we have the psychomotor learning. Okay. So when we say psychomotor learning, it includes the difference among capacity, ability, or skill. So when we talk of capacity, this is actually the innate facility or power to produce, perform, or deploy. Kapag sinabi nating ability, this is actually competence in an activity or occupation because of one's skill, training, or other qualification. And then we also have skill. Learned capacity to carry out predetermined results, often with the minimum outlay of time, energy, or both. So we have the levels of psychomotor learning. Una yung tinatawag nating perception. So when we say perception, ability to use sensory guide or sensory cues to guide motor activity. So this ranges from sensory motor stimulation through cue selection to translation. For example, adjust the heat of a stove to correct temperature by smell or taste of food. So the keywords there would be chooses, describes, detects, identifies, selects. Okay, so I do not know if binigyan kayo dati ng inyong teacher nang tinuturuan niya kayo ng lesson planning. Ito yung mga behavioral terms under the cognitive, under the psychomotor, and then under the affective domain. Ang pangalawa dyan, yung tinatawag nating set. So when we say set, readiness to act includes mental, physical, and emotional sets. So these three sets are dispositions that predetermine a person's response to different situations. So they are sometimes called mindsets. So example recognizes one's abilities and limitation. So you can actually make use of keywords such as begins, displays, explains, yan. Ano pa ba? Proceeds, shows, reacts. Okay, and then we have guided response. So when we talk of guided response, so this is actually an early stage in learning, a complex skill that includes imitation and trial and error. Adequacy of performance is achieved by practicing. Example, follows instruction to build models. So ang keywords dyan, pwedeng copies, pwedeng traces, pwedeng follows, pwedeng reproduces, pwedeng response. Okay. Next is mechanism. So when we talk of mechanism, so this is actually the intermediate stage in learning a complex skill. So learned responses have become habitual and the movements can be performed with some confidence and proficiency. Example, uses a personal computer. Okay, repairs a leaking faucet or drives a car, etc. So the keywords there can be assembles, constructs, manipulates, measures. So halimbawa, nagtuturo ka ng tawag dito, ng home economics. So you can actually use terms such as assembles, constructs, manipulates, measures, etc. Okay. Then we have complex overt response. Ayan, complex overt response. Sorry. So when we say complex overt response, so these are actually skillful performance of motor acts that involve complex movement patterns. So proficiency is indicated by a quick, accurate, and highly coordinated performance requiring a minimum of energy, including performing without hesitation and automatic performance. So ang mga halimbawa nito is operate sa computer quickly and accurately, o kaya pa pwede ding displays competence while playing the piano. Yan. So ang keywords na po pwede mong or terms or behavioral terms na pwede mong gamitin would include assembles, organizes, measures, constructs, builds, etc. Okay, and then we have adaptation. Okay, so let's say adaptation. When we talk of adaptation, these are actually skills are well developed and the individual can modify movement patterns to fit spatial requirements. Example, responds effectively to unexpected experiences. O kaya modifies instruction to meet the needs of the learners. So here are actually the terms na pwede niyong gamitin. Let's say for example, you're going to formulate the objectives. So pwedeng adapts, pwedeng alters, changes, rearranges, reorganizes, revises, varies, etc. And then we have origination. Ito yung last. So creating new movement patterns to fit a particular situation or a specific problem. So learning outcomes emphasize creativity based upon highly developed skills. For example, create a new gymnastics routine. Okay, develops a new and comprehensive training program. Yeah. So other terms can be used in formulating these objectives. So pwedeng arranges, pwedeng builds, pwedeng combines, pwedeng composes, constructs, creates, designs, initiates. So these are behavioral terms na pwede ninyong magamit in exchange of this origination na tinatawag natin. So those are the levels of what we call psychomotor learning. Okay. Usually we call this as domains of learning. Okay, so the next part would be motivation. So of course, very particular na kayo dito sa topic natin on motivation. So when we say motivation, the process of arousing the interest of an individual towards a definite goal. So we usually define motivation that way. No? So this is an internal state or condition, sometimes described as a need, desire, or want, that serves to activate or energize behavior and give it direction. Okay, although motivation cannot be seen directly, it can be inferred from behavior. We ordinarily refer to as ability. So refers to what an individual can do or is able to do, and motivation or lack of refers to what a person wants to do. So in order to do this effectively, it is necessary to understand that motivation comes in two forms. Ito yung tinatawag nating extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Okay. So ano yung tinatawag nating extrinsic motivation? So when students work hard to win their parents' favor, gain teachers' praise, or earn high grades, the reasons for work and study lie primarily outside themselves. So ano ang mga examples ng tinatawag nating extrinsic motivation? So halimbawa, prize, no? Usually if you receive something from your teacher because out of displaying a positive performance perhaps, or a good performance, no? So that is an example of extrinsic motivation. So this is fueled by the anticipation and expectation of some kind of payoff from an external source. So teacher is assertive and the students are passive. Can have a powerful effect on behavior. People work for a paycheck, not just because they like working. So tama nga naman. No? So if students are preoccupied with rewards, they might not pay so much attention as they should to what they are supposed to be learning. Too much emphasis of what we call extrinsic motivation. So a combination of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation is good, but too much emphasis of extrinsic motivation nadidefeat niya yung purpose. So if students perceive themselves as completing an assignment solely to attain rewards, they may develop a piecework mentality na tinatawag natin, or minimum strategy na tinatawag natin, in which they concentrate on maximizing rewards by meeting minimum standards rather than doing excellent job as its own reward. And then we have the intrinsic motivation. So when students study because they enjoy the subject and desire to learn it, irrespective of the praise won or grades earned, the reasons for learning reside primarily inside themselves. So this is actually fueled by one's own goal or ambitions, no, self-starting, self-perpetuating, and requires only an inward interest to keep the motivational machinery going. So the use of rewards as extrinsic motivation has sometimes been found to increase intrinsic motivation. Sabi ko nga sa inyo kasi kanina, you can actually make use of both extrinsic and intrinsic motivation in your class, but do not overemphasize yung tinatawag nating extrinsic motivation. Alam mo why? So what if wala ka ng pambili ng ng mga prizes para sa mga estudyante mo? O what if because of the prizes, yun lang yung dahilan ng mga estudyante mo kung bakit sila nagre-recite or nagpa-participate sa klase mo, no? So avoid too much emphasis on what we call extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is of course far better than extrinsic motivation. Okay? So what are the principles of motivation? So the environment can be used to focus the students' attention on what needs to be learned. no? Incentives motivate learning. Let me see. So that's actually the last part of my lecture. But here are the principles of motivation. Una, the environment can be used to focus the students' attention on what needs to be learned. Incentives motivate learning. Yun nga yung tinatawag nating incentives, but incentives can also be in the form of let's say for example, but usually when we talk of incentives, it comes in the form of extrinsic motivation, no? Internal motivation is longer lasting. Okay, so internal motivation is longer lasting and more self-directive than is external motivation, which must be repeatedly reinforced by praise or concrete words. Yung internal yung intrinsic motivation na tinatawag natin. Intrinsic motivation, again, is more lasting or is longer lasting and must be repeatedly reinforced by praise or concrete rewards. Okay, so learning is most effective when an individual is ready to learn. Remember a principle of readiness. That is when one wants to know something. And motivation is enhanced by the way in which the instructional material is organized. So take note also of that. So you can actually motivate your students with the instructional materials that you are actually using in your class. So let's say for example, even in let's say for example in a virtual class. So kapag wala kang PPT, gaganahan bang makikinig sa iyo yung mga estudyante mo? No? So if you are not going to present the lessons in a variety of ways, gaganahan ba yung mga estudyante mo? Of course not. Kapag nagtuturo ka, though of course your personality, your voice is a motivation in itself. Maganda pa rin if they are actually reinforced with instructional materials. So iba pa rin 'yon. Syempre iba pa rin yung tingin sa iyo ng mga estudyante mo. Okay, si teacher very ready siya in every time na nagtuturo siya. So meron kang mga instructional materials, they are arranged on the board, no? So alam mo when to put the materials in order. Okay? So that in itself is a motivation for students. So nakikita nyo naman na siguro, I do not know if you have already your practice teaching. So sa practice teaching ninyo, hindi ka pa pwedeng pumasok sa school unprepared. No? So every time na pumasok ka sa school, kailangan ready ka. Kailangan meron kang lesson plan, kailangan memorize mo si lesson plan, alam mo kung ano yung mga nakalagay sa lesson plan mo. Alam mo how you introduce the activity, how you introduce the analysis, how to introduce the abstraction, and then how to do the application. So kailangan ready ka, no? Para ma-motivate mo naman ang mga estudyante mo na mag-participate sa klase mo. So gone were the days na papasok ka sa klase and then you're going to write something on the board and then you're going to ask your students to copy what is written on the board. No, they are not going to learn. They are not going to learn by merely copying on what is written on the board. So mas maganda, mas nare-reinforce yung learning ng mga estudyante kapag meron kang mga materials, and then of course you'll be able to accentuate or you'll be able to discuss all these concepts clearly to your students. So these are actually very important. I know nakaka-relate kayo kasi most likely nasa practice teaching na kayo, no? Nasa practice teaching na kayo, and itong idea ng motivation ay magandang gamitin ninyo sa inyong klase. Oh, sorry. Wala ako. Wala ako bigla. Okay. So that is motivation. Pero may mga theories tayo sa motivation. Let's say for example, yung derived theory ni Clark Hall, self-efficacy ni Albert Bandura, of course the most popular is yung self-determination theory ni Desai. No? So meron din tayong expectancies and value by Atkinson. And then yung attribution theory by Weiner. Okay. So ano yung mga techniques natin? So last na lang to siguro. Ano yung mga techniques natin? I would like to discuss this one for you as a practice teacher, no? That you will be I hope you'll be able to use this in your practice teaching. After learning yung una kong discussion on learner-centered approaches, no? So these are the techniques, and then of course yung motivation natin, yung domains of learning natin na diniscuss ko also a while ago. Ito naman yung techniques in motivating learners. So this will be the last part of my discussion. Una, you will have to challenge your students. Iba pa din if you are going to offer opportunities to undertake real challenges, and then encourage to take intellectual risk. Hindi usually kasi nakakahon yung mga estudyante natin eh. Nakakahon yung mga estudyante natin. So we try to encourage our students to step out of their comfort zone. So try natin na i-challenge yung ating mga estudyante. So or halimbawa hindi nagpa-participate yung mga estudyante natin sa ating discussion, nakikita natin na yung estudyante nag-shy away siya from the rest of his classmates. So pwede nating i-challenge. Huwag natin i-focus din yung ating attention doon sa magagaling sa klase. You try to encourage others also na to express themselves, no? Huwag ka lang naka-focus doon sa mga A students mo. So remember, varied yung meron kang diversity in the classroom. So you should know how to apply diversity techniques in the classroom. Okay. Number 2, build on strengths first. So you can actually make use of the talents of your students to achieve success. So siguro yung first few weeks mo in the classroom, you observe muna. So usually kasi kapag kapag nagpa-practice teaching tayo, yung ating critic teacher allows us na mag-observe muna sa ating mga sa kanyang yung kanyang mga strategies in teaching, yung teaching per se niya, and then of course magkakaroon tayo ng chance to observe also our students. So at least doon sa 1 week na yon, you'll be able to pinpoint na kung sino yung mga may talents yung may talents sa mga estudyante mo, kung sino doon sa mga tuturuan mong estudyante, kung sino sa kanila ang may mga potentials. And you can actually make use of this ability, no, to identify yung talents sa mga estudyante mo to achieve success. Okay. And then also offer choices. The third one is offer choices or offering choices. When you offer choices, you develop ownership. So when a child makes a decision, he or she is more likely to accept ownership and control of the results. Yun eh. So pangangatawanan niya sa'yo, yung kanyang decision. No? So offering choices. Next is provide a secure environment. So importante to, no? That you will have to provide a secure environment. So this will permit children to fail without penalty. Learning how to deal with failure is critical for developing motivation and successful learning. So kasi of course na-grasp ninyo yung pagtuturo ko kanina, yung law of effect na tinatawag natin. So we try to encourage, we try to motivate our pupils, our learners, so that they are going to actively engage in the teaching learning process. So you will have to provide them a secure environment. Ikaw lang yung na teacher. That's your role as a teacher. Sabi nga nila, we can make or unmake a child. So kapag failure yung estudyante natin, you will also be it is also failure on your part as a teacher. Okay? Yan. So teach them how to make their tasks more manageable. So that's the next one. Narrowing the topic to a challenging but manageable size is very important for developing motivation. Teach them how to make their task more manageable. So let's say for example, nagkaroon ka ng group activity. So you will have to zero in kung ano yung mga activities that you are going to assign for each group. Hindi yung sabog yung mga activities. Hindi yung sabog yung mga activities na you are going to introduce to each group. So syempre you will have to take into consideration also yung yung iyong objectives mo, your activities. Okay, so considering the activities, so ano yung gagawin mo ngayon to realize these objectives of the lesson. So kung mag-group activity ka, see to it na yung mga activities that you are going to introduce are actually geared to the realization of the objectives of the lesson. Okay? Next is teach students to evaluate themselves. So usually ganun, di ba? Ginagawa natin. Okay, group 1, you're going to evaluate group 2. Group 2, you're going to evaluate group 3. Group 3, you're going to evaluate group 4, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now what do you call this? Self-evaluation needs to address the questions: what was done well? How can it be improved? Okay, yan. And of course, kailangan din natin i-emphasize yung competition sa klase. So competition can enhance or reduce motivation depending on how it is used. So depende kung paano mo siya gagamitin as a teacher. So it is good for some, but it may result in a few winners and many losers. But syempre, you will have to emphasize that winning is not the only thing. No? In life, we win, we lose. So it's the experience that matters. So usually, we encourage competition, pero dapat friendly competition among our students. Baka mamaya at the end of the class naman mag-aaway-away ang mga yan, no? Kasi natalo sila doon sa sa pa-contest mo, let's say for example. So you will have to always underscore the value of winning and losing. Okay? So part iyan ng trabaho mo bilang isang teacher. Yan. So those are some techniques na po pwede kong i-share sa inyo in motivating learners. So these are actually based on some researches, no? And also based on my experience as a teacher. So I've been in the teaching profession for 30 years already. 27 sa local college, and then another 4 sa isang private university. So that makes it 31 na pala. 31 in 31 in my teaching career. And these are some of the practices I have introduced in my class, especially among education students, on the value of motivating students and how to use these motivational strategies or techniques in encouraging active participation among our learners. Okay, so I hope you have learned from my lecture. So I will be sending the Word file of my lecture to Dean, and then as the last part of my review, I will ask Dean to share yung ginawa kong G-form ng enhancing test skills para masagutan niyo ng tama yung mga questions. Anyway, after completing the exercises or the activities naman, sasabihin niya sa inyo kung ano yung tamang sagot, no? So yun yung ginawa ko doon sa G-form na I forwarded to Dean, which shall be shared to you in a while. Okay?
Yes, sir. I'll just share na lang po. Send to their GCs po. Thank you, sir.
Okay po. So I hope I have shared something to you today. Siguro I'm sorry I was not able to meet you last Sunday. Alam niyo din po kung ano yung naging problema ko lately, which I won't be able to elaborate it here. Basta nagkaroon lang ako ng konting problema, but I am still alive and kicking, and I am really very happy to be sharing with you my ideas, my knowledge about this subject matter. No, yung susunod kong discussion would be on field study too. So since nagtuturo ako ng assessment, nagtuturo ako ng curriculum, nagtuturo ako ng portfolio assessment, so makaka-relate tayo doon sa next na discussion natin. I will be asking again din kung po pwede on weekdays din yung aking or Wednesday din next week yung aking discussion on field study 2.
Okay, sir, no problem po.
Apo.
We'll reschedule po.
Okay
Sir,
po.
I
Thank
already
you.
sent po the G form to the GCs of the students po. Thank you
Okay po.
very
And
much
then I
po,
will be
Dr.
sending to
Abby.
you. Yes po, Din. And then I will be sending to you po now yung Word file ng aking review material. And siguro ito din yung aking PPT kasi may mga binago ako ng konti.
Opo.
May binadjust lang ako ng konti para mabasa din naman nila.
Okay po, noted po.
Wait lang po.
So you may start answering the sample test.
Sent na po yung
Okay po, receive na po. Thank you po, Dr. Abby. So next schedule would be next Wednesday po.
Okay po.
Okay po.
I-resend ko lang po itong aking itong PPT.
Okay po.
Thank you po.
Okay po. I hope to see you again next Wednesday.
Thank you
Thank you, sir. Good night
Thank you,
po.
sir.
God bless
Stay safe,
po.
sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Good evening po.